The night was dark and heavy with rain. Cold wind cut across the small alien village, howling through broken fences and narrow streets. Shadows moved quickly as doors shut tight. Windows locked and lights turned away. No one wanted to see what was outside. No one wanted to feel pity. In the middle of the storm, an alien widow walked slowly, her arms wrapped around her small child. Her clothes were thin, already soaked through by the freezing rain. Her eyes searched the houses with desperate hope, but every door she passed was closed to her. She stopped at one corner and pressed her forehead to the wall, whispering, "Hold on, little one. Just hold on." The child shivered in her arms, his skin pale, lips trembling. "Mama," he whispered, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Are we going to die tonight?" Her heart broke, but she could not let him see her fear. She forced a weak smile. "No, my child. We will find shelter. Someone will help us," but deep inside she was not sure. Ever since her husband died in the last war, her people had treated her like a curse. Her husband fought on the wrong side, they said. And now his widow and her child were hated, unwanted. She had begged before, and the answer had always been the same. No food, no shelter, not for you. The storm grew stronger. Lightning cut across the sky, white fire breaking the darkness for one terrifying second. The widow's knees almost gave way. Her child was too light now, too thin from hunger, but even that weight felt heavy in her arms. Her body trembled with exhaustion. She pressed the boy closer to her chest to keep him warm. If she fell, if she stopped, he would not survive. She staggered forward again, her bare feet sinking in the mud. Every step was pain. Every breath was sharp in her lungs. The world felt like it had turned against her. Not just the storm, not just the cold, but the silence of those who could have helped. The silence of the doors that would not open. And then through the sheets of rain she saw it. A small light flickering in the distance. It was not bright, not steady. It looked like a lantern. Moving slowly, she stopped, holding her child tighter. The boy lifted his head weakly, his eyes catching the glow. "Mama." "Light," he whispered, hope breaking through his weakness. Her breath caught. She wanted to run, but her legs were too weak. So she walked step by step toward the light. Her heart pounded with fear. Who would it be? Another alien who would spit at her? Someone who would slam the door in her face? Or could it be someone different? The closer she came, the clearer the figure became. It was tall, broad-shouldered, moving against the storm with strong steps. The lantern swung in one hand. The other shielded his face from the wind. It was not one of her people. It was a human. She froze, her body stiff with fear. Humans were outsiders here, strangers in this land. Some respected them, others feared them. But to her, in this moment, he was something else entirely. He was the only soul who dared walk into the storm. The human stopped when he saw her. His eyes narrowed in the flickering light for a moment. They only stared at each other, two lonely figures in the storm. The widow's arms tightened around her child. She wanted to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She looked like a shadow of herself. Broken and desperate, the boy whimpered. And that sound carried through the rain. The human lowered the lantern slightly, studying them. He could see the truth in one glance. She was starving. The boy, half frozen, his jaw tightened. The voices of the village echoed in his mind. Don't help them. They bring trouble. Leave them to their fate. But the sight before him was stronger than fear. The widow finally found her voice, though it cracked with weakness. "Please, just a little shelter, just for the child." Her words trembled in the night. The human's hand gripped the lantern tightly. For 1 second it seemed he might turn away like all the others. The storm screamed louder. The boy coughed in his mother's arms. And then the man took one step closer. His voice was steady, deep against the storm. "Come with me." The widow's breath caught, her knees almost giving out from shock. She had expected rejection. She had expected cruelty, but instead, the human had opened a door she thought no longer existed. A door to hope. The lantern light swung forward. Guiding them, she followed, holding her child close, every step heavy but filled with a new strength. Behind them, the village stayed silent, doors shut, windows blind. But in front of them, a human's home waited. And for the first time in so long, the widow dared to believe they might survive the night. The human's small house stood at the edge of the village, its wooden walls groaning in the storm. The widow stopped just outside, clutching her child tighter, her body shaking with cold and fear. She could feel the warmth drifting from inside, the smell of firewood, and it made her chest ache, but she hesitated, because she knew once again, someone could still send her away. The human pushed the door open with his shoulder, the lantern light spilling into the room. "Get inside," he said firmly, his deep voice carrying through the storm. The widow froze, her feet heavy as stone. Was it a trick? Would he call the villagers to laugh at her, to throw her back into the storm? The child stirred in her arms, whispering weakly, "Mama, please let's go inside." Her heart tightened, and she stepped across the threshold. The warmth hit her instantly, burning her frozen skin like fire. She almost gasped from the shock of it. The door closed behind them, shutting out the roar of the wind. For the first time in many nights there was silence, only the crackle of fire in the corner. The human set the lantern on the table and turned to look at them clearly. The widow lowered her head, too ashamed to meet his eyes. Her wet hair clung to her face, her clothes dripping onto the floor. She felt like a beggar standing in a place she didn't deserve. The man did not speak for a long moment. He only stared at the child in her arms, the boy's skin pale and trembling. His jaw tightened, and without a word, he grabbed 2 blankets from the corner. He wrapped one around the child, carefully tucking it around his shoulders. The boy's eyes widened at the sudden softness, his lips trembling as he whispered, "It's warm." The widow blinked back tears, clutching the second blanket to herself. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse. The man didn't answer at first. Instead, he went to the fire, stirring it with a poker until the flames grew brighter. Then he brought a piece of bread and placed it on the table. "Sit," he said simply. The widow hesitated again. Her kind never trusted humans, and humans rarely trusted her kind. There was always fear, suspicion, and whispers of betrayal. But her child was already reaching for the bread with weak fingers. The hunger in his eyes broke her hesitation. She sat, holding him close, helping him take the food. The boy ate hungrily, small pieces falling from his lips. Tears ran down her cheeks as she watched. Because she knew it had been days since he smiled, she didn't touch the bread. Though her stomach burned with hunger, the man noticed, and he pushed another piece toward her. "You need it more than me," he said. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The warmth of the bread spread through her fingers, and she bit into it slowly. It tasted like life itself. She chewed quietly, her eyes never leaving the human. Suspicion and gratitude mixed inside her like fire and ice. Finally, she whispered again, "Why would a human help me?" "Don't you know who I am?" The man looked at her for the first time with steady eyes. "I know enough," he said. "You're a mother holding her child in a storm." His words struck her like thunder. So simple, yet no one in her village had ever said it. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Her husband's face flashed in her memory. His last moments on the battlefield. He fought on the wrong side. They said because of that his name was cursed. And his widow and child became cursed too. She whispered almost to herself, "My people believe we deserve this." The hunger, the cold, the man's brow furrowed. "That's not what I believe," he replied firmly. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look both stern and kind. The boy leaned into the warmth of the blanket, his small eyes finally closing in relief. His breathing softened, and he fell asleep against his mother's chest. The widow stroked her child's hair gently, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Her heart was heavy with fear, but for the first time in months, there was also a spark of safety. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm outside. The human finally spoke again, his voice low. "The others won't like this." Her stomach clenched. She knew he was right. The villagers would see her entering his house, and whispers would spread like wildfire. Whispers could turn into anger, anger into danger. She looked at the door with dread. "I should go before they notice," she whispered. The man shook his head, his tone sharp. "You'll do no such thing." Not with a child half frozen. She stared at him in shock, unable to answer. No one had ever spoken for her before, not since her husband's death. The fire burned brighter, shadows dancing on the walls. The child slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and the widow sat silently, her mind torn between fear and a fragile hope. She did not know if she could trust this man, but something inside told her she had already stepped onto a path she could not turn from. The storm outside screamed against the walls. Inside, 3 lives sat in uneasy silence. 1 human, 1 alien widow, and 1 sleeping child. And though none of them said it out loud, each knew this was only the beginning. The fire cracked in the small house, its glow chasing away the storm's shadow. The alien widow sat close to the flames, Her child wrapped in the blanket, finally asleep. The boy's breathing was slow and steady. Soft against her chest, she held him carefully, afraid that if she moved too much, the fragile piece would break. The human sat across the room, silent. He had taken off his wet coat and hung it by the fire to dry. His strong hands worked quietly with a piece of wood, carving something with a small knife. The sound of blade against wood echoed in the room. It was not threatening, but it made her uneasy. She kept watching him through lowered eyes, unsure of what he truly wanted. Her mind was filled with questions. Why did he help me? Why risk the anger of the village? Was this kindness real, or would he ask for something later? She remembered how many times others had smiled at her only to throw insults. How many times doors had opened only to slam harder in her face. Trust was a dangerous thing, and she no longer knew how to give it. The warmth of the fire made her body relax, but her heart stayed sharp. Her stomach ached from hunger. Yet she had eaten more tonight than in many days. She looked at her child's small face, cheeks no longer blue from the cold. For him, she whispered to herself, for him I will stay, even if danger comes. The human finally broke the silence, his voice calm. You should rest. The storm will last till morning. She looked at him quickly, eyes wide with caution. Rest? In a stranger's house? Her grip on the child tightened. I cannot. Not here, she murmured. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He returned to carving, shaping the wood into something smooth. Minutes passed in quiet tension, broken only by the crackle of fire and the child's breathing. At last, he set the carving down on the table. It was a small wooden bird, wings spread as if ready to fly. He pushed it toward her gently. For him, he said, nodding at the boy. Her eyes lingered on the bird. It was simple, but made with care. She wanted to refuse, afraid of what accepting it might mean. But her child stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out even without waking. The widow's heart softened against her will. She picked up the carving and placed it beside him. Still, doubt burned inside her. She remembered her husband's face. The day he left for war, he had promised to return, but only his name returned with shame and curses since then. Every kindness from strangers felt like poison wrapped in sugar, she whispered suddenly, almost as if speaking to the fire. My husband died because of humans. The human's knife paused in midair. He looked up slowly, his eyes unreadable. She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth, but she could not stop. My people blame me. They say I chose wrongly. They say I carry his sin. But we only wanted peace, her voice cracked. And she lowered her head again, ashamed. The man leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment, then he spoke. His tone steady but not unkind. War takes more than soldiers. It takes families. I've seen it before. He did not defend his kind, nor accuse hers. He simply spoke as someone who understood loss. That unsettled her more than anger would have. She looked at him, truly looked at him this time. His face was rugged, lined with years of hardship. But his eyes carried something she had not seen in so long, not pity, not judgment. But understanding, it frightened her more than hatred, because understanding was the first step toward trust. The fire dimmed a little, shadows creeping across the walls. The widow's body ached with exhaustion, her eyelids heavy, but her mind refused to let her rest. Every time her eyes closed, she saw faces of villagers throwing stones. She heard their cruel laughter, and she feared tomorrow they would stand outside this very house. She turned to the human suddenly, her voice low and urgent. They will come for us, won't they? The others. They will not stay quiet. The man didn't flinch. They will whisper, maybe worse. But I don't care, he said. His voice carried the weight of someone who had already made his choice. Her chest tightened. Why would he risk himself for her and her child? She searched his face for hidden motives, but found none, and that terrified her more than if he had threatened her outright. The storm outside roared louder, as if reminding her of the world's cruelty. Inside, the fire still held the cold at bay. The boy shifted in his sleep, clutching the wooden bird against his blanket. The widow brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead, her heart torn. Could this be real? Could a human's house truly be safe? She whispered to herself so quietly even the human did not hear. If this is a dream, let me never wake. And with that, for the first time in many long, endless nights, the alien widow allowed her eyes to close. The storm howled on, the village stayed silent, and in the small house of a human, warmth fought against doubt. Neither knew what the morning would bring, but both felt that tonight, Something had begun that no storm could erase. The morning came slow, with gray clouds still heavy above the village. The storm had passed, but the ground was soaked with mud, puddles shining under the weak light. Smoke rose from chimneys and villagers stepped outside, whispering to each other as they cleaned the mess the storm had left. But soon their eyes turned toward one small house at the edge of the road. The human's house last night. Someone had seen the widow walk inside. Another had heard the door close by sunrise. The story was already on every tongue. The human sheltered her, they muttered. The cursed widow and her child. Women at the well shook their heads. He'll regret it. They'll bring misfortune on his home. Men outside the blacksmith shop spat into the dirt. Foolish man. It's not our problem if she freezes. Better the storm takes her. Even children, catching the tone of their parents, whispered cruelly, "She's a ghost. Her shadow kills luck. Why did he let her in?" Inside the small house, the widow woke to the sound of those whispers floating through the walls. Her heart tightened instantly, fear pressing against her chest. She sat up quickly, clutching her child close. Her first thought was to run, to escape before the village turned its eyes on them. But the boy stirred sleepily in her arms. "Mama!" "Warm. Stay," he murmured, his little fingers gripping the wooden bird. Her throat ached, torn between fear and the fragile comfort her child had finally found. The human entered from the other room, carrying a small pot of water. He saw the fear in her eyes before she spoke. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They know we are here." He set the pot down calmly as if her words carried no weight. "Of course they know," he replied. "This village hears everything. Whispers travel faster than storms." She stood, panic rising. "Then we must leave before they come. Please let us go before it is too late." But the man shook his head, his expression hard. "You will not step outside into mud and cold again. Not with a child." Her lips parted in shock. "But they will hate you for this. They will drive you out." His voice was steady like a rock against a rushing river. "Let them hate. I don't need their approval to do what's right." The widow stared at him. Lost for words, no one had ever spoken like that for her. Not her neighbors, not her own people, a human, a stranger, stood firmer for her than those she had known all her life. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Villagers passed by his door on purpose. Glancing at the window, some muttered curses. Others spat. Finally, 3 men gathered boldly at the gate, their voices sharp. "Come out, human. We need to speak with you." The widow's heart leapt. She clutched her child tight, her body shaking. "This is what I feared," she whispered. But the human only straightened, his shoulders squared. He opened the door, stepping outside. The cold air rushed in, carrying the bitter stares of his neighbors. "What do you want?" he asked calmly. The tallest man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You shame this village bringing that woman into your home," he spat. "She carries a curse. Her husband's blood is on her hands. If you protect her, you'll bring ruin on all of us." Murmurs rose from the small crowd behind him. "Yes, send her away. Let the storm finish her. She deserves nothing but dirt and hunger." The human's jaw tightened, but he did not step back. His voice was strong when he answered, "She is a widow with a child. You would let them die outside your doors? And you call yourselves people of honor?" The crowd murmured, uneasy. The tall man's face twisted in anger. "She is not one of us. We owe her nothing." The widow listened from inside. Trembling, her heart pounded in her chest. Any second, he would give in, push her out, and the whispers would win. But then his words rang clear, cutting through the noise. "Then I owe her everything," he said, "because no one else here had the courage to open their door." A silence fell. Heavy and sharp, the villagers exchanged uneasy looks, their whispers fading for the moment. The tall man clenched his fists, but he did not strike. Instead, he spat on the ground and turned away. "This isn't over," he muttered, and the small crowd drifted back into the village, their eyes still burning with judgment. The human closed the door quietly, shutting out the cold once more. The widow stared at him, speechless. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes wide with disbelief. You defended us," she whispered. Her words carried both shock and gratitude. He looked at her, his face softer now. "I only said what needed to be said." She lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she held her child close. For the first time in so long, she felt seen, not as a curse, not as a shadow, but as a mother. And though fear still burned inside her, another feeling began to rise too. A fragile spark of hope. The whispers outside were not gone, but inside, something stronger than whispers had begun to grow, something that even the storm could not wash away. The days after the storm passed slowly, each one filled with quiet tension. The widow stayed inside the human's home, never stepping beyond the small wooden door. Every time she thought of going out, she remembered the whispers, the angry faces, the threat in their eyes. So she remained hidden, holding her child close, waiting for the world outside to forget her, but the world never forgot. The villagers still talked when they passed the house, their voices sharp like knives. Why is she still here? He'll regret this, that human. Some even threw small stones against the window at night. The widow heard them in the dark, each sound like a reminder that she was not welcome. She often thought of leaving quietly, disappearing into the forest, but every time she looked at her child's thin body, she knew he would not survive on the road. Leaving was not an option anymore. Inside the house, life began to form its own rhythm. The boy woke with the sun, smiling more often now. He played with small wooden toys the human carved for him. Little birds and animals, his laughter filled the small home, chasing away the silence that once ruled the walls. The widow watched, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. It had been so long since she had seen her child laugh. The human worked during the day, cutting wood, fixing tools, and tending to his small garden behind the house. Sometimes the widow helped, though at first she moved with caution. Always keeping her distance, she cooked simple meals with whatever they had: bread, soup, and sometimes dried roots. She cleaned the table, mended torn cloth, and made sure her child did not disturb the man while he worked. Every task she did felt small, but inside her it felt like a way to repay a kindness she could never match. Yet trust was fragile, and it trembled inside her heart like a candle in the wind. At night, when the human sat by the fire sharpening his knife or repairing tools, she often sat awake. Her mind asked endless questions. Why does he care? What does he want in return? Will he one day send us away too? One evening, as the firelight danced against the walls, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the crackle of flames. You could have let us die in the storm, she whispered. The human looked up, surprised. I could have, he said simply. She lowered her gaze, her hands tightening on the blanket. Why didn't you? The silence stretched for a long moment before he answered. Because I've seen too many graves, he said quietly. His voice carried a weight that made her lift her head. I've buried friends, family, people I couldn't save. I won't add another child to that list. The widow's chest tightened. For the first time, she realized he carried pain too, different from hers. Yet still the same language of loss. Her lips trembled. But she managed to whisper, my people, they say I carry death with me. They say the storm belongs to me. The man shook his head firmly. They're wrong. The storm belonged to no one. You just survived it. His words sank deep into her heart. She wanted to believe them, but years of rejection pressed heavy on her soul. Still, his voice was steady, and that steadiness became something she leaned on without meaning to. Her child began to cling to the human too, following him outside, watching as he chopped wood or carried water. The boy laughed as he tried to copy the man's movements with a stick. The widow watched from the window, fear mixed with something else, something warmer. Each time the man smiled at her child, her fear loosened piece by piece, but trust was fragile, and danger was still near. One night, as she tucked her child under the blanket, a loud thud hit the window. The glass rattled and the boy flinched, clutching his wooden bird tight. The widow froze, her heart pounding. Outside, voices hissed in the dark. Leave, widow, or we'll make you leave. She held her child close, fear choking her. But before she could speak, the human stormed to the door. He threw it open, stepping into the cold night. Enough! His voice roared across the yard. The shadows outside froze, whispers turning to silence. You throw one more stone, and you'll answer to me. The cowards melted back into the dark, leaving only silence behind. The human closed the door, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. When he turned, he saw the widow's wide eyes, filled with both fear and something else, respect, maybe even gratitude. He looked at her child, trembling in her arms, and his face softened. No one will harm you here, he said firmly. Then he returned to the fire, sitting down as if nothing had happened. The widow stared at him for a long time. Her heart beating fast, her child whispered softly, Mama, he keeps us safe. Her throat ached as tears filled her eyes. She hugged her boy close, whispering back, Yes, little one. For now we are safe. Trust had not fully bloomed. But the fragile seed had been planted, and though fear still haunted her, she knew one thing. This human was different, and perhaps, just perhaps, he was the first person in a long time she could begin to trust. The night was colder than any before, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. The small village lay in uneasy silence, but the widow felt no peace. Her heart was restless, her mind heavy with fear. She sat by the fire, holding her child close, listening to the sound of the human sharpening his knife. Every scrape of metal against stone felt like thunder in her chest. The boy had fallen asleep, his small body wrapped warmly in the blanket. He breathed softly, clutching his wooden bird to his chest. The widow brushed her hand through his hair, her eyes glistening with silent tears. For days she had lived under this roof, and yet each day the weight of whispers grew heavier. She knew the village would not stay quiet forever. That night her fear proved right. A sound came from outside, the crunch of many feet on frozen dirt. Then voices, low at first, then louder. She is inside, the cursed one. Drag her out before she brings more ruin. The widow's body stiffened, her blood turning to ice. The human stood at once, his face hard. He walked to the door, gripping the handle tight. But before he opened it, he turned to her. Stay with the boy. Do not move. His voice carried a calm strength, but she could see the fire in his eyes. The banging came next, fists slamming against wood. Open the door, human. We will not ask again. The child stirred in his sleep, whimpering. The widow hugged him close, her heart racing, tears burned her eyes. She had brought danger into his home. She whispered shakily, I should go. If I leave now, they will stop. The man turned sharply, his voice fierce. You will not step outside. Her lips trembled, her body weak. But they will hurt you. They will hurt us all. His eyes did not soften. Then let them try, he said. He opened the door and the cold night poured in. A crowd of villagers stood outside, their faces hard, their hands gripping stones, sticks, even blades. The tall man who had confronted him before stepped forward, his voice sharp with anger. You defy us again, human. Enough of this foolishness. Send her out or you will pay the price. The widow clutched her child tighter, hiding in the corner. Her heart pounded as she watched through the crack of the doorway. She expected him to give in, to surrender her to save himself. But the man stood tall, his shadow stretched long by the lantern light. She stays, he said firmly. The crowd erupted, shouts filling the night. She is cursed. She will bring ruin. You dishonor us all. The tall man raised his hand and the crowd quieted. His eyes burned with fury as he stepped closer. You would risk the whole village for her? For a widow and her wretched child? The human's voice rose, louder than the whispers, louder than the storm. I would risk everything for them, because while the rest of you turned away, I remembered they are people too. A hush fell, the crowd stunned by his words. The widow's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears. He was not only protecting her, he was declaring her worth before them all. The tall man's face twisted in rage. You dare choose her over your own people? The human's reply was steady, unshaken. If my people cannot show mercy, then perhaps they are not mine at all. The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. The villagers shifted uneasily, some lowering their stones, others glancing at each other with doubt. The fire in their anger dimmed, replaced with uncertainty, for deep inside, they knew his words carried truth. The tall man spat into the dirt, his pride wounded. This isn't finished. One day you will regret this choice. With that, he turned and stormed away. Slowly the others followed, their whispers trailing off into the night. The yard grew quiet again, leaving only the cold wind behind. The human closed the door, locking it tight. He turned back, and the widow stood frozen, her child clinging to her neck. Her face was pale, tears streaming freely now. You stood against them, she whispered. Her voice shook with disbelief and gratitude. He looked at her, his voice calm but firm. I told you, no one will harm you here. The widow's knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, sobbing quietly into her child's hair. Her heart was overwhelmed, fear, relief, and something she had not felt in years. Hope. The boy stirred, waking from the noise, his small eyes looking up at the man. Did you make them go away? He asked softly. The human nodded, kneeling down. Yes, you're safe. The boy smiled faintly before falling back asleep against his mother's shoulder. The widow lifted her gaze to the man, her lips trembling. You risked everything. For us, he shook his head gently. For you, it wasn't risk. It was choice. That night, as the fire burned low, the widow lay awake long after her child slept. The human's words echoed in her heart. Choice. He had chosen her when no one else ever had. And though fear still lingered, trust now rooted itself deeper, fragile, but growing stronger with each passing breath. The night had tested them, and in that moment, a bond stronger than whispers, stronger than fear, began to form. The widow closed her eyes, tears drying on her cheeks. For the first time in so long,
she believed they might not be alone anymore. The dawn broke slowly,
painting the horizon with soft shades of gold and silver. The storm was long gone, leaving the ground damp and fresh, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. The small village stirred awake, but the widow felt as if a different world had begun. She sat by the window, her child still asleep in her arms, his head heavy against her shoulder. Her eyes were tired, yet there was a new light in them, something fragile. Yet alive, the human moved quietly in the kitchen corner, preparing bread over the fire. The smell filled the house. Warm and inviting, it was such a simple thing. But to the widow it felt like a miracle. She had forgotten what it meant to wake up to safety, to food, to a roof above her head. Her lips trembled as she whispered softly, This feels like home." The boy stirred, blinking sleepily, his small hands clutching the wooden bird. "Mama, is it morning?" he asked with a yawn. "Yes, little one," she answered, kissing his hair. "It's morning, and we are still here." Her voice shook with emotion, for every morning until now had been uncertain, filled with fear of where they would go next. But today was different. The human placed bread and a pot of warm tea on the table. "Eat," he said simply, his tone as steady as always. The boy hurried to the table, excitement brightening his tired eyes. The widow followed slowly, her hand shaking slightly as she took the bread. She tasted it, soft and fresh, and tears filled her eyes. It was more than food, it was dignity returned. For a long while they ate in silence, broken only by the boy's happy chewing. The widow's heart swelled as she watched her child laugh, his cheeks no longer pale. Her chest ached with gratitude, though words seemed too small to hold what she felt. At last she looked at the human across the table, her voice soft but firm. "You gave us more than shelter. You gave us life again." He paused, his hand resting on the cup. His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "You don't need to thank me," he said. But she shook her head. "I do, because no one else ever would have opened that door." The boy suddenly spoke, his small voice cutting through their silence. "Can we stay here, Mama?" "With him, I like it here," the widow froze, her heart pounding. Her eyes flicked toward the man, unsure how he would react, but his lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "If you wish to stay, then this house has room," he said. Her throat tightened, tears slipping down her cheeks. The boy clapped his hands softly, hugging his wooden bird. "Then this is home," he whispered with joy. Outside, the village still watched, still whispered. But something had changed. The mob had seen the human stand firm, his voice louder than theirs. And while some still burned with anger, others had begun to doubt. They had seen a child laugh inside his house, seen a widow stand without fear for the first time in years. Whispers could not erase that image. Later that day, as the sun climbed higher, the human worked in his garden. The boy followed him, carrying a small bucket. Trying to help, though the bucket was almost too heavy. The widow stood at the doorway, watching with wide eyes. It was a picture she had thought she would never see. Her child smiling under the sun, not starving, not crying, but alive, learning, growing. The human noticed her watching and nodded toward her. "You could help too." "The earth doesn't care who plants the seed," he said. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she was truly welcome in this new life. But then she stepped forward, kneeling by the soil, her hands pressing into the damp earth. Together they planted small seeds, silent but united for her. Every seed was more than food. It was hope sown into the ground. That night, when the fire burned low again, the widow tucked her child into bed. The boy smiled up at her, his small voice sleepy. "Mama, we're safe now, aren't we?" She brushed his hair gently, her voice steady. "Yes, my love, we're safe." When she turned, she found the human sitting by the fire, his face lit softly by the glow. She walked closer, her heart trembling. For days she had carried fear, doubt and shame, but now, standing in his house, She felt something different, something like belonging. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I thought we had no home left. But you gave us one." The man looked up, his eyes calm. "This is not just my home anymore," he said quietly. "It's yours too." Her tears fell freely then, and she sank to her knees, her child's soft breaths behind her, the warmth of the fire before her, and the strength of the human's words in her heart. For the first time in years, the storm inside her soul began to fade. In its place, something new bloomed: trust, hope, and the beginning of a life she thought was forever lost. The village would still whisper, storms would still come, but in this small house, the widow and her child had found more than shelter. They had found a man who chose them, a place to belong. And as the night wrapped around them, one truth remained clear. This was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new one.